My name is Janny Whitaker. I'm 28 years old. At my birthday party, my sister dropped my cake on the dining room floor and told 11 witnesses, "You deserve to know. We never loved you." I turned to my parents. My mother looked away and said, "You should have known." I said, "All right," and I left without raising my voice. What none of them knew was that my grandmother had been preparing for this exact night since 2018. She'd hidden something in a clock she gave me when she died. 6 years. I owned it. 6 years. I never opened it. The morning after the cake hit the floor, 43 missed calls, 126 texts. Too late. I was already at a lawyer's office at 6 in the morning. By Monday, my family's company couldn't open its doors without me. They taught me to be invisible. They forgot to ask what an invisible woman could do. If you've ever been the daughter who carries the family while everyone else takes the credit, you already know how this story ends. Subscribe before this gets to the part where I open the clock. You'll want to be here for what fell out. The dining room at my parents' house always looked better at night. Mom had set the table herself. Linen napkins, the water glasses I'd polished as a kid, my grandmother's silverware in the heavy oak box she kept in the break front. That silverware was the only thing of Constance Whitaker's that had ever made it into Frances Whitaker's house. My mother kept it in storage most of the year. She brought it out only for occasions she wanted documented. I should have noticed she'd set the table for 14. 11 friends? 3 of us in the family. That was 12. The 2 extra plates at the far end were polished, with folded napkins beside them, and they remained untouched all evening. Looking back, those plates were never meant to be filled. They were meant to be visible. It was a Saturday night in early November. The crowd I'd invited was small but specific. Nora Whitley, my best friend since college, who happened to be a journalist. David Brennan, a wine photographer I'd known 4 years. A sommelier from a Michelin-rated restaurant in Portland. 2 cellar staff who had worked under my grandmother before me. Eleanor Crane's daughter and son-in-law, 3 friends from UC Davis. Nora arrived first. She handed me a wrapped book and whispered, "Are you sure about tonight?" I'd told her about the Mercer offer. I hadn't told my parents yet. I thought I had until Monday. "I think Dad's going to surprise me," I said. "He asked me to wait a week before deciding. I owe him at least the dinner." Nora's face did something I couldn't read. "Okay," she said. "I'm right here." Holly carried out the cake at 9:15. It was a 3-tier confection she'd ordered from the bakery in Lake Oswego where my mother's bridge club met. White fondant, sugar peonies, gold detailing. The kind of cake that announced its own price tag. My sister carried it like it was someone else's problem. Her phone, normally up and recording every family moment for her 78,000 Instagram followers, was face down on the sideboard. My mother, who had live-streamed every birthday since 2019, did not raise hers either. I asked Holly to make a wish with me. She said, "I already did mine, Jan." She set the cake on the table. She straightened. She looked at me, directly, calmly, with the eye contact of a person who has rehearsed something in a mirror. And she opened her fingers. The cake hit the table edge, then slid, then dropped to the Persian rug my grandmother had given my parents in 1991. Frosting bloomed across the wool. White sugar petals pressed into the dark red dye. The room made the small involuntary sound of 11 people inhaling at once. Holly didn't react to the noise. She didn't react to the rug. She looked at me again, and she said, "You deserve to know, Jan. We never loved you. None of us. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not me. Just Grandma. And she's not here anymore to lie for you." 3 years of therapy had taught me to recognize a sentence rehearsed in a mirror. Holly had said this one before, maybe 20 times, maybe 100. I could hear the practice in the edges of the consonants. I turned to my parents. My father's hand was shaking. He had set down his wine, and the glass was sweating onto the linen, and his fingers were resting beside it without holding on. His mouth opened. He looked at my mother first. He didn't speak. My mother did not look up. She studied her own folded hands as if they had become unfamiliar to her. When she spoke, her voice was the same cool, measured voice she used to ask the housekeeper to use the good silver. "Janny," she said, "you should have known. We were going to tell you eventually. Holly is just more direct." My father's hand was shaking. My mother's wasn't. That told me everything. I scanned the 11 faces around the table. Nora was already standing, already coming toward me. David Brennan, the photographer, had picked up his phone and was holding it close to his chest, lens tilted just enough toward the table. He wasn't filming for fun. I didn't know what he was filming for. I only knew his hands were not surprised. The sommelier had set down her glass with a small, definite click. The Cranes, Eleanor's daughter Margaret and her husband David, were standing in the back of the room like witnesses at a deposition. 11 people had heard my mother say I should have known I wasn't loved. 11 people had watched my father stay silent. 3 of them were in the wine industry. By Monday, all of them would matter. I set down my napkin. I thanked the people who had come. I walked to the entryway and lifted my coat off the hanger. The cashmere coat my grandmother had given me at 22, the one I'd never been able to leave at her house. Nora followed me to the front door. "Jan," she said, "what just happened?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but I know they planned it." I drove home with the radio off. The dashboard clock read 9:47. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything. I went home and I stared at my grandmother's grandfather clock, the one she'd given me 6 years ago, the one that had stood in the corner of my living room and chimed every quarter hour I'd lived in that apartment. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if she had been waiting for this night. My grandmother bought her first vines with money she'd saved from teaching high school chemistry for 9 years. 40 acres in the Willamette Valley, paid for in 1962, when banks did not loan to women. She was 29. She told me once, sitting on the back porch with a glass of her own Riesling, "Janny, the dirt doesn't care if you're a woman." That line is in my head every morning I wake up. She kept her first dollar, a check from a small restaurant in Salem that bought a single case of her 73 Pinot Noir, folded in her wallet for the rest of her life. When she died in 2019, no one in the family knew where it went. She'd named the company Whitaker Estate Vineyards and Reserve. By the time she handed it over, it was $32 million in revenue, 3 vineyards across 240 acres, a tasting room that drew 200 guests on a slow weekend, a boutique inn with 8 rooms, a wine club of 4,200 members. The industry knew her name. Wine Spectator had reviewed her 81 Reserve at 89 points. Back when 89 points from Wine Spectator meant something. She did not retire. She worked until the week before her stroke. Her son, my father, Walter Whitaker, became CEO the morning after her funeral. The board voted unanimously. He had her last name. He'd grown up in the cellar. He looked the part. He was 62 now. He'd never run anything in his life. My mother is Frances Whitaker, Vassar class of 1987, Pi Beta Phi, Junior, Miss Oregon, 1985. She married my father in 1990 with the specific ambition of becoming a Whitaker, the way a certain kind of woman in this country marries into a name the way other people marry into a family. My grandmother never accepted her. Not in any open way. Constance Whitaker was not cruel, she was unmistakable. She referred to my mother's interior design choices as interesting in a tone that meant nothing of the kind. The first time my mother offered to redecorate the tasting room, my grandmother said, "Frances, dear, the tasting room sells wine, not cushions." My mother spent 40 years trying to belong in a house she'd married into. She decided early which daughter would help her finish the job. Holly came first. 3 years before me. By the time my sister was 4, my mother had a plan for her. Junior Miss Circuit at 14, ballet at 6, the dance company at 12, Vassar at 18, Pi Beta Phi at 19, an MBA from somewhere appropriate, marriage to a banker by 27. Holly hit every milestone within 6 months of schedule. She was Junior Miss Oregon at 15, top 3. She danced the Sugar Plum Fairy at 12. She got into Vassar Legacy. She married a man named Andrew Pemberton Hayes. Yes, that was his real name. In a wedding at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden that cost $312,000 and required 2 photographers. Holly didn't grow up. She was assembled. By the time I was 8, I understood the shape of the house I lived in. My sister was my mother's masterpiece. I was the leftover clay. I'm telling you this not to make you sad for me. I'm telling you so you understand what my mother decided about me when I was very young, and what I, without being aware of it, decided back. I rejected my mother's path one quiet refusal at a time. At 8, I was supposed to compete for junior princess in the local pageant my mother had pre-registered me for. I told her I wanted to attend a children's pruning workshop at my grandmother's vineyard instead. My mother said no. My grandmother called my mother and said, "Frances, don't make this a fight. You'll lose." I went to the vineyard. I came home with stained fingernails and a cutting from my grandmother's oldest Pinot vine. I planted it in the garden. My mother had it pulled the next week. At 12, I quit ballet on the day of my final recital. I asked my grandmother to teach me to read a soil report. She said yes. My mother stopped speaking to me for a month. My grandmother said, "Frances will get over it. Soil doesn't." At 17, I turned down Vassar. I'd gotten in Legacy. I went to UC Davis instead. Viticulture and Enology, the program my grandmother had once dreamed of attending in the 50s before the program admitted women. My mother told her bridge club I was taking a gap year. I never came home for that gap year. I just kept going to school. At 22, I was supposed to be maid of honor at Holly's wedding. My mother had picked the bridesmaids' dresses. I was due in London that week for the International Wine Trade Fair, where my grandmother had reserved a seat for me at a masterclass on Burgundy I'd been studying for 3 years. I went to London. Holly's wedding album does not contain a single photo of me. My mother didn't hate me. She couldn't accept that I existed as proof her path wasn't the only one worth choosing. Holly extended Frances. I disproved her. My choices weren't rebellions. They were the slowest, quietest no a daughter can give a mother. And my mother heard every one of them. My father knew. My father always knew. He knew my grandmother had trained me from the time I was small. He knew which daughter was his mother's. He knew which daughter was his wife's. And he made, over and over, through 28 years, the same decision. He kept the peace. He chose not to choose. He let my mother arrange the household, and he let my grandmother arrange me, and he stayed comfortable in the gap between them. Once, when I was 19 and home from school for Christmas, my father had a few too many glasses of his own reserve and said to me, "Janny, you have your grandmother's eyes. I'm sorry that's not easier for any of us." Then he stood up, refilled his glass, and went to the den. We didn't talk for the rest of the holiday. Some men inherit timidity the way others inherit blue eyes. He didn't choose his cowardice, but he didn't fight it either. And in a family where a daughter is being slowly disqualified from love, a father's silence is the loudest endorsement. That was the house I grew up in. 2 daughters. One mother who had chosen which of us mattered. One father who agreed by not disagreeing. And one grandmother, gone now for 6 years, who had been quietly designing my survival the entire time in ways I would not understand until I opened the back of a clock. My grandmother died on September 14th, 2019. The funeral was small. The will reading was the next day, in Bernadette Ashford's office in downtown Portland. Bernadette had been my grandmother's estate attorney for 32 years. She wore a navy suit and silver earrings my grandmother had given her in 1996. She read the will in a voice that did not change inflection, the way good lawyers read wills. My father inherited the company. The board confirmed him as CEO that afternoon, ceremonial and unanimous. My mother inherited a piece of land my grandmother had bought in Ashland in the 70s. About $90,000 worth, my grandmother's quiet way of acknowledging that Frances was, technically, family. Holly received a vintage jewelry case my grandmother had owned since the 60s, and a small wine cabinet, and $12,000 in cash. I received a grandfather clock. I'm being literal. A mahogany grandfather clock. 6 feet 4 inches tall. Westminster chimes. Roman numerals. Built in 1907. Restored in 1962. The year my grandmother bought it. The same year she planted her first vines. It had sat in the corner of her office for 57 years. She had specified, in handwriting, that it was to be moved to my apartment within 7 days of her funeral. My mother did not handle it well. "A clock," she said in Bernadette's office, loud enough that the receptionist heard. "She gives Jan a clock?" Holly, beside her, laughed once and said, "At least it's not the vineyards." My father said nothing. My mother thought it was an insult. I thought it was my grandmother's last act of love. 6 years later, both of us would learn we were half right. I joined Whitaker Estate 2 weeks after the funeral. Operations coordinator. $58,000 a year. I'd been working at a small winery in McMinnville for 6 months out of UC Davis, and I left without notice when my father called and asked me to come home. I didn't ask for the title. I didn't ask for the pay. I came because my grandmother had built that company, and she was no longer there, and someone had to keep it standing. That same year, my sister was promoted. Holly had been doing freelance marketing for a Portland real estate firm. She had no wine credentials, not WSET Level 2, not even an introductory sommelier course. My father appointed her chief marketing officer of Whitaker Estate at a starting salary of $185,000 a year. She took the job. 3 months later, she'd repainted the tasting room and launched an Instagram account for the inn. For 6 years, I told myself the salary gap was about experience. I was lying to myself. It was about which daughter my mother wanted seen. Holly didn't know the difference between a Pinot Noir and a Pinot Gris until she was 31. By then, she was the face of the company on Instagram. She'd done a wine enthusiast photo shoot in 2023. Full page, captioned, "The New Generation of Pacific Northwest Wine." The shoot was at the cellar I had rebuilt. She didn't know my name was on the architectural permit. Here is what I actually did. In those 6 years, while my sister was learning to pose with bottles. In 2020, I renegotiated our contract with Frederick Distributors in Seattle. Saved the company $340,000 a year. My father signed the contract. The board minutes credited him. In 2021, I rebuilt the wine club from 1,200 members to 3,400. I wrote the retention strategy. I designed the loyalty tier. I trained the customer service rep. Holly posted a photo on Instagram of herself holding a wine club pin and captioned it, "Our team's hard work is paying off." In 2022, I designed the blend for the 2020 Reserve Pinot Noir. Wine Spectator gave it 92 points. My father accepted the award at the Oregon Wine Industry Gala. He did not mention me in his speech. I was sitting at the same table. In 2023, I led the tax restructuring that saved the company $580,000 across 3 years. My mother, at the country club, told her bridge friends that Walter is becoming such a savvy CEO. Walter had not read the tax filings. He had signed where I'd flagged the signature lines. In 2024, I oversaw the renovation of the Boutique Inn, a $1.2 million project. and brought it in $130,000 under budget. Holly led the press tour. She posted a video of herself in the new wallpaper, captioned, "Bringing the Whitaker vision to life." I'd designed the wallpaper. I'd chosen the wallpaper. I'd argued with 3 contractors about the wallpaper. She was 48 hours late to the press preview because she'd flown to Cabo with Andrew. In April 2025, the spring frost came late. The Pinot Noir blocks were vulnerable. I worked the wind machines for 4 nights with Daniel Pierce, the cellar master we'd hired the previous summer, and 4 cellar hands. We slept in shifts. We saved 60% of the crop. The next morning, my mother called me. She said, "Janny, can you pick up Holly's dry cleaning before her dinner tonight?" I picked it up. The receipt was $84.50. Holly's silk Carolina Herrera dress, dry cleaned 3 times because she'd spilled wine on it at a tasting. I kept the receipt. I keep it still. I keep it because someday I needed to remember the exact price of being invisible. $84.50. I kept records, not because I was building a case. I kept records because I needed someone, even if it was only my own future self, to know what had happened in that company. I bought a binder. I labeled it Operations Improvement Records, 2019 to 2025. By the spring of 2025, it was 380 pages. I wrote on the inside cover in my own hand, for Grandma. What I did not know, what I would not know until November of that year, was that I was not the only person keeping records. Eleanor Crane, my grandmother's cellar master for 38 years, had retired in 2024. She was 78. She had also kept a notebook. She had been keeping it since the morning of my grandmother's funeral. 380 entries in her own handwriting of every operational decision I had made and my father had signed credit for. She had kept it because, 3 days before my grandmother's stroke, my grandmother had asked her to. Bernadette Ashford had a folder labeled Whitaker, Constance, January file. It contained 16 versions of trust documents my grandmother had drafted between 2014 and 2019. The 17th version was the one she had executed 3 weeks before she died. Nora Whitley had been taking notes since 2021. She told me later, "Jan, I started writing it down because I knew, eventually, you'd need a witness who hadn't been related to anyone." 3 women had been watching for 6 years. None of them had spoken yet. They had been waiting for me to ask. I just hadn't known to ask. In September 2025, a woman named Catherine Morrow at Pacific Business Quarterly called me. She was a senior business reporter. She told me she'd been pitching a profile on Whitaker Estate to her editor for 4 months, and the editor had finally said yes. She asked if I would talk to her. I said yes. I did not tell my father. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell Holly. The article ran in the September issue. 8 pages. Cover line: The Quiet Vintage. How Jan Whitaker saved a heritage winery without a single press release. Catherine had interviewed 4 distributors, 2 master sommeliers, 3 former cellar staff, 1 competitor CEO, and Eleanor Crane. The quote that ran on page 2 was from a master sommelier named Carla Bianchi at a 3 Michelin star restaurant in Manhattan. She said, "If Jan Whitaker ever leaves Whitaker Estate, the wines will tell us first. The numbers will tell us second. The press release will be last." I read the article in my apartment, alone, on a Sunday afternoon. I cried for the first time in 3 years. Then I noticed something. My mother had never called to congratulate me. My father had not called either. Holly had not posted about it on Instagram, the way she posted about every other piece of press the family received. That silence told me what was coming. I just didn't know in what shape. 2 days after the article ran, my mother burned her copy of the magazine in the fireplace at the country club. I would learn this later. Patricia, the friend who had asked her, "Frances, Your daughter's all over Pacific business. How proud you must be, told my father, who told Bernadette, who told me. My mother had smiled, gone home, and burned the magazine in front of my father. That night, my mother said to him, Walter, I want her gone before this gets worse. My father said, Francis, she's our daughter. My mother said, she's becoming her grandmother. My mother's worst fear was never that I'd leave. It was that I'd succeed in a way she couldn't take credit for. In October, Wine Enthusiast published its regional feature, Notable Voices in Pacific Northwest Wine 2025. I was on the list. Holly was not. Holly had pitched herself to the magazine 4 months earlier. The editor had passed. I learned later that my sister had texted my mother an hour after the issue posted online. Did you see we? They picked Jan over me. After everything Brand has done for that company. After everything I have done. My mother's reply was, Holly, sweetheart, we're going to fix this. I did not see those texts in October. They would surface later. But that text, the certainty in we're going to fix this, that was the moment my mother decided what would happen at my birthday. In early November, Maxwell Reeves called. Maxwell Reeves is the CEO of Mercer Wine Group. Mercer is based in Sonoma, 6 estates, $180 million in annual revenue. He had been recruiting me, gently and persistently, for 14 months. He told me later, the day I signed, that he had read the Pacific business profile and known I was ready before I did. The offer was Chief Operating Officer, $245,000 a year, 4% equity vesting over 4 years, a signing bonus of $25,000. Mercer would sponsor my Master of Wine program tuition, $14,000 a year, an investment in my career that my own family had refused to make. Office in Sonoma, with dual residency in Sacramento. Start date, January 2nd, 2026. I told my father in his office on a Tuesday. I closed the door. I said, Dad, I think I need to take it. He went pale. He sat down. He said, Janny, please, give me a week. Don't tell your mother yet. I said, why? He said, because I can't lose you both, you and Grandma, without trying. I gave him the week. I never should have. He used it to plan something I never saw coming. 2 weeks before my birthday, my father, my mother, and my sister met at our country club bar. They drank 4 glasses of Sancerre between them. My mother put the bar tab on the company card. The receipt, $86, would route through my bookkeeping department 2 weeks later, and I would sign off on it without reading the venue line, because by then I was preparing for my birthday and trying not to think about the offer letter in my apartment safe. The conversation, as Bernadette would later reconstruct from a recording David Brennan didn't know he was making. Brennan had been seated at the bar, 2 stools down, scrolling his phone, went like this. My mother said, if John leaves with the article still warm and the Mercer offer in her pocket, the industry will say Whitaker is dying. Wine Spectator will smell it. Distributors will leave. We need her gone like a difficult daughter, not a talent. We humiliate her at her own birthday. 11 witnesses, 3 of them in the wine industry. The story writes itself. Whitaker daughter has a public meltdown, leaves family business in disgrace. By the time she signs at Mercer in January, the narrative is set. Holly said, Mom, that's a lot. My mother said, Holly, your sister is about to take the only thing I've ever built, your name. My father said nothing. My family planned my humiliation over 4 glasses of Sancerre at a country club where my grandmother had once been refused membership for being a woman in business. My mother charged the bar tab to the company card. I had signed off on the bookkeeping report 2 weeks earlier. I never even read the venue line. Pause for a second. If you were John in the room I'm about to describe, with a binder of 6 years of evidence and the proof that your grandmother had been protecting you from beyond the grave, Would you read everything in the binder? Or would you give them a chance to apologize first? Comment with your answer before you watch what I actually did. I want to know what you would have chosen. I drove home from my parents' house with the radio off. I stopped at a red light at 122nd Avenue. A woman was crossing in front of me with a stroller. Her toddler was reaching up, fussing for something. A snack, a toy, a hand. She bent down without breaking her stride. She fixed it. She kept walking. The woman did not look up at me. She had no idea I was watching. For the first time in my life, sitting at that red light, I let myself ask a question I had not allowed myself to ask in 28 years. Is that the thing I never had? I didn't know if I was crying. My face wasn't wet. But something inside me was leaking. The dashboard clock read 9:47. I knew that when I got home, my grandmother's clock would chime 10. For 6 years, that clock had marked every hour I'd lived invisible. I didn't know yet that it was about to mark the hour I stopped. I let myself into my apartment. I turned on a single lamp. I sat on the sofa across from the clock. The pendulum swung. The brass weights gleamed. At 10 p.m., the Westminster chimes rang their full sequence, 16 notes, then 10. The sound was the same sound it had made every hour for 6 years. The sound my grandmother had heard for 57 years before that. I remembered the last thing she'd ever said to me. It was 4 days before her stroke. We were in her office. She had taken my hand and pulled me toward the clock. She'd said, "Janny, every hour this clock chimes, that's me telling you, you are enough." I had laughed. I had said, "Grandma, that's beautiful." I had not asked her what the clock was for. I sat across from it. I looked at the pendulum. The pendulum was slow. I did not know how I knew. I had lived with that clock for 6 years. I had not once consciously timed the swing, but that night, sitting in the half-dark of my living room, I knew the swing was wrong. Each pass took an extra fraction of a second, maybe a tenth, maybe a hundredth. Pendulums do not slow down on their own. Something was making it heavier. I went to my desk and got the small set of brass screwdrivers I kept for adjusting wine equipment in my apartment. I knelt behind the clock. I opened the back panel. It slid up simple, and I looked inside. Behind the pendulum, mounted to the inside of the cabinet wall, was a small wood panel that did not match the rest of the clock. 4 inches by 6 inches, 4 brass screws holding it in place. The screws were brighter than the brass that held the rest of the mechanism. They had been installed later. Somewhere between 1962 and 2019, my grandmother had hidden a panel inside this clock. I unscrewed it. Inside the compartment, wrapped in pale archival tissue, were 4 objects. I lifted them out one at a time and placed them on my coffee table. The first was a folded letter. 4 pages. The outer fold read, in my grandmother's handwriting, "For Janny, when she needs it." The second was a sealed legal envelope, embossed, Multnomah County Office of the Recorder, stamped, notarized. I could see the corner of a document inside. The third was a manila envelope holding bank documents. The first page beneath my grandmother's hand, Constance Whitaker Educational Trust for January. $620,000. 2-factor authentication enclosed. The fourth was a bottle of wine. Wrapped in tissue, lying on its side, was a bottle of Whitaker Estate Reserve Pinot Noir, vintage 1973, the first vintage my grandmother ever produced. 52 years old. The label was cream yellow with age, the script my grandmother had hand-drawn before she could afford a designer. Across the bottom corner, written in pencil in her own handwriting, in letters I could barely make out. Drink it the day you know who you are. Not before. I sat on the floor of my apartment for 40 minutes before I touched any of it again. I was not ready. but I was closer than I'd been an hour ago. I picked up the letter. I unfolded it. I read it once, silently. I read it again, out loud, to no one, because I needed to hear my grandmother's words in my own voice. I will not paraphrase what she wrote. I will give it to you the way I read it. Janny of mine, if you're reading this, they've done what I was afraid they'd do. I watched your mother for 28 years. Frances doesn't hate you. She just couldn't accept that you weren't a copy of her, the way Holly is. You proved a different path was possible, and her ego couldn't survive it. Your father is weak. I am sorry I raised a weak son. I tried, I failed. Don't blame him. But don't save him anymore either. Holly is your mother's product. She doesn't have malice. She just has never had to stand on her own. She'll learn, but not from you. I prepared 4 things. Each one is a choice, not an order. Use them or burn them. I ask nothing. I only wanted you to have a choice, the thing I never had at 28. Every hour this clock chimes, that's me telling you, you are enough. You always were enough. You are the most beautiful thing I built in 84 years. And I built 240 acres of vines. With my love, all of it, Grandma C. The letter was dated August 22, 2019, 3 weeks before her stroke. I held the letter for an hour. Then I held the bottle for another. I did not open the bottle. I was not ready. But I knew now what the bottle was for. And I knew now what the letter had been telling me for 6 years from the corner of my apartment. Every hour. Every quarter hour. Outside, the city was sleeping. Inside, my grandmother's clock kept time the way she had wanted it to. Every 15 minutes, she said, "You are enough." I had stopped being able to hear her. Not anymore. At 4:08 in the morning, I emailed Bernadette Ashford. The subject line read, "Activating Succession Protocol." The body was 4 sentences. Bernadette, this is Jan Whitaker. My grandmother's letter mentions you. I'd like a meeting at 7 a.m. today. The clock has been opened. Bernadette replied at 4:14. Jan, I've been waiting 6 years for this email. Office at 7. Coffee will be ready. She had been waiting. I was not the only person my grandmother had prepared. At 5 a.m., I sent a second email to my father, copied to Whitaker Estate's general counsel, copied to the Whitaker Estate board distribution list. I had written the email at 3 the night before. It had been sitting in my drafts since I'd first read my grandmother's letter. The email contained my resignation, effective immediately. The activation of my voting rights under the August 2018 Trust Addendum, registered with Multnomah County and notarized by Judge Howell. A request for an emergency shareholder meeting under Section 4.2 of our bylaws, 10 days notice, scheduled for December 16th. And a notice that I had transferred administrative access to my personal backup email at 5:32 a.m. By 6, I had accepted the Mercer offer. Maxwell Reeves had emailed back a single line. "Welcome to Mercer. Your packet ships overnight." By 7, I was sitting in Bernadette Ashford's office with a cup of coffee that she had made herself. She placed a red folder on the desk between us. The label read, Whitaker, Constance, Jan file. She opened it. Your grandmother wrote 16 versions of these documents between 2014 and 2019, she said. The version we'll execute today is the 17th. She signed it 3 weeks before she died. I said, why didn't she tell me? Bernadette did not pause. She said, Janny needs to want her own life before she can use mine. Inside the file was a notarized addendum to my grandmother's will, establishing a trust that held 35% of the voting shares of Whitaker Estate Vineyards and Reserve, with me as the sole beneficiary, activatable any time after my 25th birthday. There were bank signatory cards, There were power of attorney instructions. There was a series of contingency letters. If Francis does X, do Y. Written in my grandmother's handwriting, sealed in envelopes, dated and ranked. Bernadette had executed none of them yet. She had been waiting for the trigger. At the bottom of the folder, taped inside the back cover, was a Polaroid photograph. Me, age 8, in a small denim jacket, kneeling between vines. My grandmother behind me, hand on my shoulder, both of us laughing. I had never seen the photo before. I had been my grandmother's project the entire time, the slowest, most careful project of her life. At 8 a.m., I called Eleanor Crane. Eleanor was 78. She lived alone in a farmhouse 3 miles from the cellar she'd run for 38 years. She had retired the previous spring. She had been my grandmother's closest professional friend. Eleanor said, "Janny, I'll be at Bernadette's office in 40 minutes. She arrived with a leather-bound notebook. The cover was scuffed and watermarked. She placed it on the conference table the way you place a relic. 380 entries, she said. Every operational decision you made between September 2019 and last spring that your father took credit for. I started it the morning of Constance's funeral. She had asked me to, 3 days before her stroke. She told me, Eleanor, watch what they do to her after I'm gone. Help her when she needs it. Not before." I asked Eleanor, "How did Grandma know there would be a day?" Eleanor said, "Because she'd watched Francis raise Holly, and she knew what Francis would do when she ran out of ways to make Holly look bigger than you." By 11 a.m., I had assembled what I'd come to think of as the case file. Bernadette had it. Eleanor had it. I had it. 3 copies, hard and digital. The contents were the notarized 2018 trust addendum with Multnomah County registration, Eleanor Crane's 380-entry notebook, my own 380-page binder of operations improvement records, 2019 to 2025, 6 years of internal financial documents with timestamps showing my signatures on the work and my father's signature on the credit, a timeline of every press release, award, and external recognition that had attributed my work to my father or to Holly. The screenshot of Holly's October text to my mother, "Did you see we?" pulled from Andrew Pemberton Hayes's email, where Holly had accidentally forwarded the thread when she'd been venting. The country club bar receipt for $86 on the company card, with no business minutes filed for the date. The audio file from David Brennan's phone. He had not known he was recording the country club conversation. His phone had been on a voice memo from earlier that morning, sitting face up on the bar 2 stools from my mother. At 11:30, I checked my phone for the first time since the night before. 43 missed calls, 126 texts. I read them all. I did not call back. I did not reply. The first call had come at 8:05 from my father. Frederick Distributors had called the office demanding contract renewal, and only I had the password to the vendor management system. 8:22. My mother, because Crow LLP had emailed about quarterly tax filing, and Holly had no relationship with our accountant. 8:45. My father again, because a master sommelier from Manhattan was on the line about an exclusive allocation, and my father did not know what an exclusive allocation was. 9:30. Holly. 11 texts in 7 minutes, because the spring-in coordinator had called about the Saturday wedding event, and Holly had never run a wedding event, and I was the one who had kept the vendor relationships for catering and florists and valets. 11 a.m. IT, because they'd discovered I'd transferred admin access at 5:32 a.m., and they could not roll it back. Noon. Insurance broker, because there was a $180,000 crop insurance claim that only I had the timeline records for. 2 p.m. Tau, my father, because the Wine Spectator journalist had been on the calendar for the week, and my father had not known about the appointment. The last text, sent at 5:58 p.m., was from my father. It said, "Janny, please. The company can't open without you. I know I haven't earned the right to ask, but please. Just for the company. Just one call." I had spent 6 years answering every text my family sent within 10 minutes. I had spent 28 years being available. That morning, I learned what too late actually meant. It wasn't a punishment. It was a boundary I should have set in 2019. 6 years late was still better than never. The emergency shareholders meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. December 16th in the conference room at Whitaker Estates' Salem headquarters. 9 people were present. My father, Walter, at the head of the table. My mother, Frances, in the chair to his right. A chair she had pulled from another room because the bylaws did not list her as a shareholder and because she had insisted on being present anyway. Holly, beside my mother. 4 outside board members: Margaret Sutton, retired senior editor at Wine Spectator; Robert Pemberton, retired CFO of a regional bank; James Thornton, an independent vineyard owner from Hood River; and Anne Holloway, a corporate governance attorney from Eugene. 2 company lawyers, and a single empty chair at the foot of the table, opposite my father. At 9:02, Bernadette Ashford and I walked in. I sat in the empty chair. Bernadette stood. She placed a leather folder on the conference table and embossed seal side up, slid the top document toward Margaret Sutton. "Good morning," Bernadette said. "I'm Bernadette Ashford, estate attorney to the late Constance Whitaker. I'm here today to inform the board that a shareholder has activated voting rights granted in a 2018 trust addendum, registered with Multnomah County and notarized by Judge Howell. The shareholder is Jan Whitaker. The voting block is 35%. My father's face went white. My mother did not lift her head. Holly said, "What? She has shares? How?" Bernadette did not answer Holly. I read my statement. I had written it the night before, on yellow legal paper, by hand. I read it slowly. I did not pause for breath. I did not look at my mother. "I am submitting my resignation, effective immediately. I am exercising my voting rights to nominate Eleanor Crane as interim chief operating officer until the board can find a permanent replacement. I am providing the board with documentation of operational decisions I have made on behalf of this winery over 6 years that were never credited to me. For board records only, not for press. I am not seeking back pay. I am seeking accuracy. After today, I will not be available to consult. The next time you need someone to negotiate with Frederick Distributors, you will need to do it yourselves. The next time the spring frost threatens the Pinot Noir blocks, you will need someone in the cellar at 3 a.m. That someone will not be me. I am not asking the board to take sides. I am asking the board to know what happened here, so that whoever leads next understands what this company costs to run. Thank you." My father stood up halfway through my statement. He left the room. He did not come back. Bernadette distributed 11 binders to the 4 outside board members, to the 2 company lawyers, and additional copies that would be filed with the corporate secretary. Each binder was 410 pages. Each binder contained Eleanor Crane's notebook, my own operations records, 6 years of financial documents, the press timeline, the Holly text, the country club receipt, and the bar audio file with a transcript. Robert Pemberton, the retired bank CFO, was the first to flip through. He paused on the spring frost incident from April. He read for 90 seconds. He looked up at Bernadette. He said, "Bernadette, how much of this is verifiable?" Bernadette said, "All of it. Every signature is timestamped. Every email is archived. Every decision is corroborated by Eleanor Crane and 3 former seller staff who have agreed to testify if asked." Holly stood. This is ridiculous. I'm CMO. I have done so much for this brand. Bernadette gently and firmly said, "Honey, this isn't your meeting anymore. The shareholder block has the floor." My mother had not moved. Her hands were folded on the table, white-knuckled. Her coffee was untouched. I looked at her for the first time in 5 hours. I said, "Mom, I am not going to say anything to hurt you here. I just need you to look at me." She did not look up. I said, "All right." Margaret Sutton called for a vote on my nomination of Eleanor Crane as interim COO. The vote was 4-1. My mother voted no. Eleanor was confirmed. My resignation was accepted, effective immediately, by unanimous board action. The meeting adjourned at 10:47 a.m. Margaret Sutton stayed in her seat as the room emptied. She watched my mother gather her purse. She watched my father's empty chair. As Holly was leaving, Margaret said, in a voice that was clear and old and patient, "Walter, Francis Holly, the board will need to discuss next steps without family present. Please leave the room." By 11, my family had been removed from a meeting in their own building. I watched my father walk to his car alone through the conference room window. He did not look back. 3 days later, on December 19th, I posted on LinkedIn. The post was 480 words. "I will not give it to you in full. I want you to find it yourself if you'd like. But I will give you the parts that mattered." I wrote, "After 12 years contributing to a Heritage Oregon winery without public credit, by my choice, until now, I am taking a position at a company that values both my work and my voice. To anyone in this industry who has felt invisible inside a family business, your skill is real even when no one names it. Your value is not contingent on being seen by people who chose not to see." My grandmother, Constance Whitaker, planted her first vines in 1962, when very few women did. She built this estate with her hands and trained me with her palate. The greatest tribute I can give her is to do for myself what she did for herself in 1962. Today, I am joining Mercer Wine Group as Chief Operating Officer. The first wine I will pour on my first day will be from a bottle she left me. I attached one photograph. The 1973 Reserve Pinot Noir, unopened, label visible. Within 6 hours, 4 master sommeliers had publicly congratulated me. Within 12, 2 wine journalists had reposted. Within 24, a retired senior editor at Wine Enthusiast had left a comment. Holly's old academic advisor at Vassar had left a comment too. It said, "Proud to have known your grandmother. Welcome to your own legacy, John." By December 22nd, the post had 52,000 reactions and 3,100 reposts. By Christmas, 3 Whitaker estate distributors had quietly emailed Mercer to ask if I was open to lunch. By New Year's, Frederick Distributors had notified my father in writing that they would not be renewing their contract for 2026. Wine Spectator ran a follow-up story called "Whitaker Estate Loses Quiet Vintage to Mercer Wine Group." Pacific Business Quarterly republished the Catherine Morrow profile with a postscript. Wine Enthusiast dedicated 4 pages of its February 2026 issue to my move. An anonymous master sommelier left this comment under my LinkedIn post. "I'd been buying from Whitaker for 11 years. Today, I learned every bottle came through Jan, pouring her name across all 9 of our restaurants this week." I did not write the LinkedIn post for revenge. I wrote it because, for the first time in 12 years, I had the right to put my name next to my own work. The industry didn't believe me. The industry confirmed me. There's a difference. The first one needs proof. The second one doesn't. 3 months after I left, Frederick Distributors canceled their contract. $2.4 million in annual revenue, gone. The wine club shrank from 4,200 members to 2,800 in 90 days. Eleanor Crane, who had agreed to serve as interim COO, resigned after 60 days. Her resignation letter to the board said, Walter is undermining every operational decision I make. I am not here to manage his ego. The company needs leadership. I have given all the leadership I have. On March 14th, 2026, my father had a heart attack. It was a small one. He survived. He was in the hospital for 4 days. On the second morning, my mother called me. I let it go to voicemail. 2 hours later, my father called me himself, from his hospital bed, on FaceTime. I answered. It was the first time I had spoken to him since the boardroom meeting 4 months earlier. He said, "Janny." I said, "Dad." He said, I'm not asking you to come back. Your mother was wrong. I was worse, because I knew. Grandma told me before she died. She said, "Walter, you have one daughter who is yours and one who is hers. If you don't choose, eventually they will, and the one who is yours will leave." I didn't believe her. I'm sorry, Janny. I'm so sorry. I did not say anything for a long time. He did not press. I said, "I'll come visit, Dad." Once. No promises. I drove to Portland the next morning. I did not tell my mother or Holly I was coming. I sat in my father's hospital room for 46 minutes. He held my hand for 30 of them. We didn't talk much. When I left, he said, "Janny, the bottle, have you opened it?" I said, "Not yet." He said, "You'll know when." That summer, my mother started therapy. Walter told me by email. He told me she was seeing a woman named Dr. Helena Gardner in Portland twice a week. He told me Dr. Gardner had asked my mother in their first session what she had wanted for me when I was born. He told me my mother could not answer. My mother began writing me letters, one every 2 months. I opened them all. I did not reply. The third letter, in October 2026, said, "Janny, I went to therapy this week. The therapist asked me what I had wanted for you when you were born. I couldn't answer. Holly, I had wanted 3 pages of things for. You, I had wanted. Nothing specific. I had wanted you to not exist as proof that I had failed at something. I am so sorry. I don't expect a reply. I just wanted you to know. I am beginning to see it. I keep that letter in a small box in my apartment. I don't display it. I haven't burned it. My mother is not going to heal in time to save me. She is healing in time to save herself. That is enough. Her healing is not my project. Holly wrote me 7 letters between November 2025 and March 2027. The first 6 contained the word "but." They were apologies in the shape of an apology. "I'm sorry, but you have to understand. I was wrong, but Mom said. I shouldn't have, but you had been." The 7th letter, in March 2027, was 4 pages long and contained no but. She wrote, "Jan, I've been thinking about the cake. I dropped it, I planned it, I said the words. There is no but. I made you the villain in my own life because Mom needed me to be the hero in hers. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say it out loud, in writing, with no excuse." I called her. We spoke for 22 minutes. We did not see each other. I told her, "You can call me on my birthday, once a year. That's what I have for you right now." She said, "Okay, thank you." She hung up. We have called every November since. 12 minutes. Sometimes shorter, never longer. It is not a relationship. It is the rough draft of one. I am not sure either of us will ever finish it. That is okay. Andrew Pemberton Hayes filed for divorce in February 2026. Holly's marketing firm let her go in April, citing brand integrity concerns. Her Instagram dropped from 78,000 followers to 32,000 by June. Her dental hygienist license, she'd quietly maintained it as a backup, was suspended in August, following a separate complaint I had nothing to do with. By October 2026, she had moved back into my parents' house. She was 33. When my mother saw her on the second floor of the family home, in the same bedroom she had decorated for Holly when Holly was 12, my mother began to see herself for the first time. That is what Walter wrote me. He said, Frances looks at Holly in this house, and she finally understands what she has done. It is the only mirror she could not break. My family did not fall because I left. They fell because I had been the only thing holding them up. The difference between cause and exposure is a difference my grandmother had understood for years. It is now June 2027. I have been at Mercer Wine Group for 18 months. I was promoted from Chief Operating Officer to Vice President of Operations and Strategy in May. The Pacific Northwest portfolio has grown 23% under my leadership. My salary is $295,000 a year. My equity vests over 4 years. I have not yet earned my Master of Wine. I am still in stage 1 of the program. I have my WSET diploma. I have business cards that read Jan Whitaker, DIP WSET, Vice President of Operations and Strategy, Mercer Wine Group. I work 70-hour weeks. I love 70-hour weeks. The difference between now and before is that many someones, say my name out loud when I do. In January 2026, I founded the Constance Whitaker Mentorship Fund. I seeded it with the $620,000 my grandmother had left me, plus $200,000 of my own, plus $580,000 matched by Mercer over 2 years. The fund is $1.4 million. The mission: scholarships for women entering viticulture, enology, and the wine business. In our first cohort, we funded 14 women. Eleanor Crane, now 80, is chair of our board. The fund's logo is a small grandfather clock face. The chime in our podcast is the Westminster sequence. At our first scholarship ceremony, in summer 2027, a young woman named Penelope Walsh, 19, just admitted to the UC Davis viticulture program, just 6 months past the loss of her own grandmother, came up to me afterward. She held the program in her hands. She was shaking a little. She said, "Miss Whitaker, my grandmother was the only person who saw me. I don't know how to keep going without her." I reached into my bag. I keep a small stack of photocopies in there. Copies of my grandmother's letter, with her name redacted, with only the words. I gave one to Penelope. I said, "Read it. Your grandmother is still watching you. They always leave something. Sometimes it's a letter. Sometimes it's a bottle. Sometimes it's a clock you don't understand for 6 years. You'll find yours." She read it standing up. She cried. She hugged me. That night, I drove home to my Sonoma apartment. The grandfather clock, moved from Portland in February, stood in the corner of my new living room. At 9 p.m., the Westminster chimes rang. I walked to the shelf beside the clock. I took down the bottle of 1973 Reserve Pinot Noir. The label said, "Drink it the day you know who you are, not before." I opened it. The cork came out clean. 54 years was past prime by most standards, but my grandmother had always cellared correctly, and the wine had a chance. I poured one glass. I stood at the window. Sonoma at sunset. Vineyards in golden light. Rows on rows of vines. Somebody else's now, but the same shape and the same patience. I took a sip. The wine tasted exactly the way my grandmother's memory had tasted in her cellar when I was 8 years old. Oak. Cherry. Leather. Time. I whispered in the only voice I had left for her. "Today I know who I am, Grandma. Thank you for waiting." I poured a second glass. I did not drink it. I set it on the windowsill, the way my grandmother used to leave a glass for my late grandfather every December. A small ritual she had never explained, and that I had never understood until that night. My family taught me to be invisible. My grandmother taught me to outlive their assumption. I am 29 now, soon to be 30. I have a job that says my name out loud. I have 14 women in school because of a clock my mother once called a desk. I have one phone call a year with my sister. I have one quarterly visit with my father. I do not have a relationship with my mother yet, and I am at peace with the word yet. If this hit close to home, if you've felt invisible in your own family for too long, share this with one person who needs to hear it. Not someone who hurt you, someone who has also been the daughter who carried the weight. We don't need our families to apologize before we set ourselves free. We just need to know we're not alone. Comment with one word your grandmother used to say to you. I'll read everyone. If you are watching this and you have a grandmother, call her. If she's gone, look for what she left you. Sometimes it's a letter, sometimes it's a bottle, sometimes it's a clock you've owned for 6 years and never opened. They always leave something. The job is yours. Open it.